Hello, welcome. It's me once again, Mystical McKay, here to read to you. I think it's the last chapter of this book, The Completion Process by Teal Swan. This is the reconciliation, supposedly. That's what this chapter is called. Welcome. I had a lot of fun reading this book these past couple of weeks. It was my first book that I've ever read out loud, and I'm so glad that it was, because it means the world to me, and it's my favorite book ever. And I feel honored to be able to spew such wise words to you. Reconciliation. It doesn't even say that it's a chapter, so I don't even know. It just says part 3. Which I think is weird. But let's see what else it says. Oh, here we go. Chapter 9. Life-changing impact of the completion process. So she might tell a couple of stories from her perspective of people who have done the completion process, or she might just be like actually having people tell their stories. I don't know if she's telling them for her or what. I'm gonna tune in here. Thank you guys for being here with me. Happy Mother's Day, by the way. Hope you guys did something good for your someone who nurtures you. Doesn't have to be your mother, just somebody who takes care of you. Let's get into it. This is chapter 9. The life-changing impact of the completion process. The people who work for me and with me know that helping individuals with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a particular passion of mine. So it came as no surprise when in 2014 my assistant burst into the room to tell me about a veteran in England who had been working with the completion process in his own life. He had discovered so much success by using it himself that he had contacted our offices to ask for my permission to use the process with other veterans who were returning from the war with PTSD. Cool. Thank you. This was the first time I was made aware of Sergeant Steve clues. I contacted him to tell him that he not only had my blessing, but he also had my full support. During the months that followed, him and I consulted on occasion about the completion process, and he shared with me a confidential basis some of the most tremendous successes that a particular individual that he was working with was experiencing. It was his passion to use the process with other war veterans turning into a purpose, and I am pleased to share that he is now on a mission to expand this work even further. This is the kind of crazy shit I want to do. Meeting a man of action. I had the pleasure of meeting Steve and his family in person for the first time in London on August 2015. It felt like a dream come true for me to meet this man who had independently begun working towards my original vision and was turning it into a reality. Thank you for the subscription! You may have noticed in your own life that whenever you develop a strong connection to someone before you see him or her, finally meeting them is a very emotional experience. As Steve and I sat down to tea, he leaned his cane against the wall, and when we smiled at each other, our smiles themselves said 1,000 words. At that moment, I simultaneously felt both joy and sadness. Those of us who have been touched at our core by life-altering trauma carry a particularly kind of grief that is like a stain. We come to believe that this stain is what makes us unlovable and ruined. We spend years trying to rub this stain out, and we recognize it instantly in others. But this stain, like a stain added to a pot before it is fired, is in fact part of our matured beauty. It adds a certain depth to the feel of us. Sitting in front of Steve that day in August, I saw his stains. I could feel that he recognized my stains as well, and the relief that came as a result, as that recognition was palpable. It brought us each the silent gift of both understanding the loyal camaraderie. Like me, he and his family had been called to do this healing work within the world, and millions of lives stand to benefit by it. Steve's story is a constant reminder to me that when we experience painful things, we rarely know why. We don't see how it fits into the bigger picture of life, and so we feel victimized by it. But if we have the patience to put one foot in front of the other in the direction of healing, the why eventually reveals itself to us, and we suddenly see the bigger picture. So often, it is beautiful, and I can tell you that it was that day. This chapter is about Steve's own story and other stories gathered from courageous people who have experienced the completion process firsthand. Like Steve, some of them have gone on to become facilitators, and others are just enjoying the aspects of renewed well-being and a zest for this new life that they never thought they would have ever experienced, ever again. Sergeant Steve Clues has been quite public with his own story and has given me the permission to use his name. Others who sent in personal stories have given similar missions, but most of them live very more private lives, and in order to protect them and their families, I have chosen to change most of their real names and any identifying details for this book. The quotations, however, are in their own words, which I feel are helpful for understanding why people choose to practice this process in their lives. You can see the interesting and surprising way it has helped them and others. This is so cool. I never read this part, I don't think. Steve Clues served as a sergeant in the Royal Armoured Corps Cavalry for the British Armed Force for 12 years, with a number of active tours in both well-known and remote theaters of operation. He also served as part of a specialized training unit that carried out duties of close protection. He knew as a young child that he wanted to be a soldier, and that he joined the Army Cadet Force at the age 12. As soon as he left school, he joined the British Army, enjoying the disciplined training and passing through basic training. I am eternally grateful to him and the others for sharing their personal experiences. During 12 years of active military duty, Steve experienced many traumatic events. He admits that in the line of duty, he had to take lives. Due to the situations he was placed in and the conditions and the time, he had no doubt in his mind that there was no alternative. He came very close to losing his own life, to the point where even his clothes and armor were damaged by the shrapnel and bullets. He even witnessed close friends and colleagues killed and seriously injured. Oh my. Yikes, right? After leaving the Army, I would last like 2 seconds in the Army. He took resettlement retraining in IT, and it was a good match for him. Within a year, he became a MCSE, a Microsoft certified system engineer, and was employed as a system administrator for a large company. But something was not right, and he could just not settle. Quote, "There was a part of me missing. Also, at the time, I was in a terrible relationship, and I could not settle into a family life," he recalled. "I had an aggression inside of me that manifested as if I had a double personality. When it was triggered, this cold and calculated and very dangerous person would just step in and take over. It was as if the real Steve, me, who was a rational and logical thinker with a good social moral and etiquette, was completely taken over. I felt silenced and overridden completely by this other person who was so violent. Each time this aspect of his personality would take over, it stole more of Steve's self-worth and self-control. He says that it got to the stage where just standing and talking to someone, no matter what the situation, he could feel a rage growing inside of him. He would suddenly feel adrenaline begin to surge through his body. First he'd feel his jaw clench, then his shoulders tense, ready to strike out. I felt like I was going to seriously hurt them. I realized that things were wrong. This was not the real me," he explained. "So I started to withdraw from social events and society to avoid any triggers and not expose myself to any environment that could set this thing off." He left his job and the relationship he was in. Isolation is always the answer. He left his job and the relationship, and he contacted some guys he knew who were working the circuit in Arab states on close protection work, bodyguards. He knew this work would put him back in some extremely hostile and dangerous locations, but he hoped that it would give him some sense of control again. Oh, God. Lord. Trying to adjust to a quote-unquote normal life. The line of work was all right for a while, but after a few years, he wanted to return to the UK and settle down and finally make a home. However, within a few months, he found himself struggling yet again with his hyper-vigilant personality and his overwhelming urges towards aggression and violence. He moved from one job to another and kept relocating, but still felt drawn to more violent types of work, such as being volatile, not violent, volatile. I said violent, and then it said, such as being a doorman at night. That's not very funny. So why are you laughing? Okay. Volatile, such as being a doorman at night and a store detective by day. Despite his best efforts, he felt his violent side try to rise up, to the point of almost killing someone, and it freaking him out. Even though he tried to keep himself very healthy and even had his own gym, he found that his overall health was deteriorating, bringing with it a lot of pain, bowel problems, and sleep issues. He also suffered from type 2 diabetes and particularly some nasty anxiety attacks. Then around April 2013, he suddenly and dramatically faced an even more serious health challenge. He suffered a minor stroke, followed by another stroke a few weeks later, which I guess wasn't minor. Was it average, moderate, medium, large, extra large? I don't know. But it was not just his health that Steve was worried about. He had lost his 8-year-old son about 3 years earlier to a brain tumor. Oh my God. At the funeral, Steve found that he could not show emotion or even any tears. Then over the next 2 years, both of Steve's parents died suddenly, and the same thing happened. He could not allow himself to grieve or express any emotion. Yikes. Whew, he knew it wasn't healthy to keep so much grief and anger trapped inside. Well, at least he knew he was feeling it. But he just couldn't express his emotion. After the strokes, he felt even worse because he no longer could do the physical things that he had been doing. And his health had been spiraling even further downward. During the next few months, he developed fibromyalgia, a chronic fatigue syndrome, and his diabetes suddenly required huge amounts of insulin in order to be controlled. Yo. It was then that the underlying mental issues and the PTSD really struck him, and struck him hard. I was diagnosed with severe anxiety and severe clinical depression. Steve recalled, I started to suffer with dissociation seizures on a frequent basis, which are like a fits of seizures, but without shaking. Afterwards, you don't even know if you remained conscious or not. How bizarre. I've never heard of that. In terms of physical mental problems, he realized now that he was suffering from Gulf War syndrome. In the UK, the Ministry of Defense still doesn't officially acknowledge this syndrome, even though Steve has personally met many veterans who suffer from it. Gulf War syndrome. Seeking some kind of solution. By this time, Steve said that his mental health was causing serious problems and he still could not control his temper. The slightest thing would trigger him into rage, and he often had no idea or conscious awareness of what the trigger was. How maddening. Like many people in this situation, he tried various antidepressants. And he was referred to counseling and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Steve admits it did not go well, and he stopped going after just a few sessions. He felt like the counselors were patronizing him, pretending to understand him, and those professionals actually became triggers. It was a dark time, and he says, I felt like kicking the 7 bells of dirt out of them. Eventually, he became a prisoner in his own home. We don't talk about that. Avoiding even looking out the front window in fear of triggers. Oh my, it's not that bad yet. This lasted over just a year, during which he never went out, and he had to be personally supervised by his wife or a family member. He lost all sense of his self-worth, self-control, and he didn't even trust himself. One day he decided that there was only one way out, which was to commit suicide. He made several attempts, all of which failed. His lowest point came next, on my final attempt, as I started to push a carving knife into the artery in my neck. I glanced down at my beloved dog, who was looking up at me, and I froze on the spot. He recalled with emotion. I failed again because of the look on my dog's face, looking up at me. Now I didn't even have the control to end my own life. Oh my God, Jesus Christ. Whew. A star is born, anybody? Help. As the last act of desperation, he sat down at his laptop and just typed in, Dealing with anxiety. Something I've searched like 700 times when I was 14 into YouTube. Huh. Many typical websites popped up. But then he noticed one of my sites. It had a picture of a YouTube channel, and on the topic it was speaking about dealing with the emotional body. Steve had no patience left to read anything, but since this was a video, he clicked on it, and he listened to me explain how the emotions worked and how we deal with them mostly in the wrong way. He says he could hardly believe it. It was as if a light in my brain was switching on, he explained. She talked at a level that I could connect with and understand and finally relate to. It's as if someone had come along and placed a jet wash in my head and cleared out all the garbage that allowed me to actually get an angle of understanding as to what's really going on. For the rest of the week, he said that he was glued to YouTube, watching video after video. He recalled feeling such a sense of relief when he finally started to recover. Feeling complete at long last. Steve is clear about why this approach to healing clicked for him. For me, the biggest breakthrough to recovery and healing was learning about how emotions work and learning about acceptance. Wow. For as long as I can remember in my adult life, I had been suppressing my emotions. This is something that soldiers do as a part of life. They're not often even aware that they are doing it. As a soldier, you cannot show emotion, except one that is pure aggression in the face of adversity. It works very well when you are serving, and I will say it has saved my life on a lot of occasions, but the problem is, when I left the Army, I found that this simply does not fit with a civilian lifestyle. No, not really. When he heard me explain online that emotions are messages that are delivered to make us aware of something, everything finally made sense to him. The more he ignored those messages in his life and suppressed them over the years, the louder they would be shouting at him. Sure enough, these messages found other ways to make him listen, manifesting in other forms such as severe pain, stress, skin rashes, stomach disorders, and so on. Steve suddenly realized that he could not outrun or keep hiding from these messages. He couldn't fight them because they were in his own head and his own mind. What would happen, he wondered, if he opened up and allowed them in? What if he truly listened to them? At first I was afraid of doing this because of what had I got to lose. But then I was like, what have I got to lose? He recalled thinking, sure enough, it wasn't long until something outside triggered me. I sat down in a chair and felt the aggression. I really went into myself and really felt it. I allowed every physical feeling to come through, and I identified with it. I allowed the feeling to rise, and I felt as if I was dropping down a funnel into me. Ew. Then the exact opposite of what he expected to happen began to happen. He said it was like he had passed through a tunnel that came out on the other side, but that other side was calm and clear. The physical turmoil and emotional feeling had passed, and he felt lighter, as if coming up for air after holding your breath underwater. For the first time in a long-ass time, Since I could remember, I felt connection with my body and mind, and I was actually in control, he said. I could not believe, at first, how easy this has been. After years of suppression tactics and distracting, all of this time, all I had to do was actually just listen and accept what my emotions were trying to tell me. Within a few days of this initial process, my world has changed completely. Life was in front of me, and now I can take it on with open arms. I felt strong, and my energy levels are rising rapidly. He realized that if this had worked for him, then he could use this to help others. He was one of the first people to become a completion process practitioner. You can find more details about this certification in Appendix B. As Steve says, I started to deliver the completion process to veterans who were in crisis, and every veteran that I have worked with has found it to be the answer that they have needed. I watched as the whole aura of a person changes. Their posture changes. Their facial expressions, especially around their eyebrows, they relax. Their fists are unclenched. As I bring them out again when they are ready, they look at me with such a look of relief. I ask them not to talk for a few minutes and just to absorb how they feel, because I know firsthand that it can be hard to put anything into words. I have been successfully delivering the completion process for a year now, and I firmly believe that it is time to expand this process so that anyone can get the relief that they so desperately need and change their lives for good. One of the reasons the completion process works for Steve and his fellow veterans is that it allows us to become less reactive. Post-traumatic stress response can go away. Even though you may not have faced actual war, you have quite likely faced a particular trauma. And this process can benefit you in the exact same way. As you practice the process, you will find that triggers will no longer plague you. Once you begin to heal the wounds buried in your subconscious mind, you become free of your sore spots. As a result, the people you come in contact with won't trigger you in the way that they once did. What a feeling of freedom to realize that something that would have once infuriated the shit out of you before no longer even bothers you. You can begin to respond in thoughtful ways to difficult situations within your life, instead of merely reacting to them unconsciously like a chicken with your head cut off. As a result, you will experience much less conflict in your life, naturally. Isn't that beautiful? When you stare at death and win the fight. Staring contest? Well, I have been working as a healer for many years. It is still interesting to me that the numbers of ways trauma can affect people physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, sometimes affecting every aspect of themselves and their lives. Very often, the person can't figure out what is going on, and their life just continues to spiral out of control. Jonathan was a young man who faced serious yet rather mysterious symptoms which sent him looking for answers. He says that he started getting fevers and losing a dramatic amount of weight in April of 2013. At first, he thought that he had picked up a persistent flu. He worked in a busy retail store during the day, and being sick was really hard because he had to stand all day. Then he started to get nosebleeds, and some days his whole body would ache. He finally decided to go to the doctor. They ran tests on me for weeks, he said. Eventually, they called me into a private office and gave me the worst news of my life, he recalled. I was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia. That day, my whole life fell apart. I was facing the real possibility of dying, and dying young. I was immediately consented to chemo treatments and radiation therapy. I had to quit my job. There's no describing the emotional and physical pain of that experience. Jonathan said that he slipped into deep depression, and to make matters even worse, the medical treatments did not work. Really? Thank you. Look at my beautiful dog. Good boy. Okay. Sorry. He slipped into depression. He was convinced that he was going to die. Desperate to find a solution, he started to look. Sounds like he wasn't convinced then. Desperate to find a solution, he started to look into alternative treatments to cancer. Then, in the fall of the same year, he was listening to a morning radio show in his car about natural health. What? That's real? That exists? I was giving an interview talking about how I sometimes work one-on-one with terminally ill clients. He pulled over to the side of the road and contacted my office to schedule an appointment right away. When he showed up for an appointment, he fully expected to be a passive participant in the process of healing, as had been the case with doctors that he had been seeing. He was surprised when I explained my approach, and that I wasn't a doctor, and that I believed that the precondition of his illness was not physical, but emotional. Dun dun dun! Wow! If only people would teach that in preschool, where would we be? He admits that what I said sounded super far-fetched, and that was even a little radical to him at the time. But being desperate, he was willing to try anything, right? So once I met Teal, I began using the completion process in my own life every day. Oh my God, I need to do this. I really do. When I started trying it, my mind would hijack me out of the experience, he described. But after a week, I woke up with the awareness that I was feeling crushing emotional pain. It felt like my heart was broken. I later realized that this feeling was grief. From what I had learned from Teal, I was able to completely be present with this feeling, and for the first time in years, I started to cry. In fact, I sobbed for over an hour. Hell yeah, thank you. Thank you. Jonathan says that he suddenly understood, after years, that he had been carrying around a feeling from his childhood that he was being attacked from all angles of his life. Oh my God. He felt like there was no way out, and that he had no support from anyone or any way to handle any obstacle in his life. He had also had another common feeling that I often hear about from clients. That he described it this way: I had never actually felt safe. The place I should have felt safety, such as my home, were places of great hostility, blame, and abuse. I always felt invaded by the harshness of the world itself. I had to grow up too quickly with no support in a hostile world. Once Jonathan learned how to really be with his old feelings, he was able to heal the buried wounds and the grief within himself. It was no longer before he started feeling a sense of relief and resolve could he face these old emotions. I was able to provide my inner child and my heart with the things that I did not get as a child. And as a result, the world started to feel a whole lot safer. I even found a best friend during this process who moved into an apartment with me, and some days I even enjoyed my life. I actually forgot about dying for an hour at a time. I was feeling complete, so I figured that if it was my time to die anyway, I was prepared to trust that I could face that. He could have concluded his comments there, but he continued, "Here is the best part. I went to the doctors after months of doing this process, and they told me that my cancer was in remission. I feel that it wasn't the chemo that did it, nor the radiation, or any of the doctors or the other people who could have cured me. It was me. I cured myself. I truly believe that I have cured myself by actually facing the root from which the pain that I had been carrying for years, by waking up both spiritually and emotionally. My cancer has been in complete remission for just over a year now. This has not been an easy process, but I have come to realize that true healing is rarely an easy process." Experiencing the freedom of peace. There's this quote that has been circulating around my everyday life these past couple of days, and it is, "Peace of mind is your greatest form of wealth." Your greatest form of wealth is your peace of mind. If you know, you know. I am sharing these stories to give you an appreciation for what you can gain by making the completion process a part of your life. One of the first things that you may notice is the potential for experiencing peace. Like forgiveness, peace cannot be forced. You cannot just decide to be peaceful because it isn't something that you do, but rather, peace is something that organically occurs within you in response to healing. You may not be aware of it, but peace is not a purely positive state. It's a state that transcends opposites. Peace actually transcends both the positive and the negative. Many people look at an enlightened person and assume that the enlightened person feels positive emotions all the time, and that is why he or she behaves the way they do. The truth is that an enlightened person has made a practice of releasing all resistance from his or her being. It's not that they never experience conflict or pain. It is that they are willing to be open to experiencing that conflict and pain. Once you become willing to feel, you no longer resist the conflict or the pain, and you no longer fear the future. You'll become so open to experience all things in life that you won't resist any experiences. In the absence of that resistance, you will find peace. In this way, true and lasting peace isn't the result of no longer experiencing any kind of conflict ever again. It's the result of embracing all experiences, whether they involve conflict or not. Peace works on the assumption that there is value to negative experiences and also great value in positive experiences, and that these two states need each other to exist. Peace is a level of freedom that most people never experience in their life, but peace is always available to you. Thank you. Overcoming barriers in career and life. You have now heard 2 client stories that are dramatic, so you might wonder, are they all that way? Dramatic. What other good things can come out of the completion process? Here's a case where Isaac, a man in his 30s, found that the completion process helped him secure financing for a venture after years of having difficulty closing such deals. My inner child just said, blah, 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 adulting. In 2013, Isaac was trying hard, but not succeeding. To raise a lot of money for his company, he seemed to have a number of investors interested in his business, all ready to invest, but every time, at the last minute, they changed their mind, and he wouldn't get the funding. He wondered if he was cursed or something, so he reached out to me to consult about my business to see how he could overcome the blocks that he was feeling. It was during these consultations that I told him about this process, and he started to use it on himself. He soon realized that he struggled with a number of patterns around money, and he had begun to understand the root of this issue. I was neglected as a child, he said, and as a result, I had the subconscious belief that my needs could not be met by others and that I had to do everything on my own. I would attract interest in my company through my passions, expertise, persistence, and then my emotional wounds from childhood would sabotage all my fundraising efforts. Oh my God. Wow. The awareness of this helped him to understand that his most important desire was to be loved, and that making lots of money was the main way that he was trying to get love. Wow. He kept on creating an environment of scarcity in his company, but slowly he began to see why he did this. I think I was subconsciously trying to prove to myself that my employees stuck around because they truly loved me, he recalled. After all, they could not possibly stay because they liked the daily struggles that we were under, and since I could only pay them a salary that was under market level, I figured they must be sticking around for one reason. They love me. Interesting. As he continued to use the completion process, he learned how to change his thinking and learned the importance of connecting to how he felt. He started to engage in activities that felt good rather than thinking that he had to keep struggling all the time. As he put his new realizations to good use, he soon found that he could not only attract amazing opportunities and outcomes into his business life, but he could also seal those deals. He summed it up in business terms. Once I broke down the blocks and embraced my emotions, I found a renewed passion in my business, closing $1.5 million in funding. We are projecting to surpass $7 million in revenue this year. As I have continued to watch his success soar, I am so happy that he is finally living his dreams. Wow. Finding your true purpose. Many good things happen when someone embraces the completion process. You can enhance your life in very similar ways. Facing and resolving your emotions is an excellent way to help yourself become more authentic. When you do, you will have greater access to what is truly bringing you joy as you discover the gifts that you came into this life to give to the world. This might be a new concept to you, but I believe that one's life purpose always comes in a form of what we are meant to give to the world. As children, we were not disconnected from what brought us joy when we were good, from what we were good at. We did those things naturally. In that way, we were closer to our purpose as children than we usually are as adults. By integrating our fractured childhood aspects this way, the way that Isaac did, we regain access to these natural aspects of ourselves, rediscovering what it is that we want to do with our lives. We find our passion. You'll also see that he became even more passionate and creative in his drive to advance his company. He finally felt renewed energy, which is a normal outcome of the completion process. Oh my God, let me tell you. Whenever we integrate aspects of ourselves that we have rejected and therefore suppressed, we begin to feel the urge to create. As we become more authentic, we gain access to the gifts that we have come into this life with, and our creativity naturally skyrockets to help us achieve our goals. Crazy. I can't even begin to tell you what that feels like. Living a high-stress life while flying high. People who have aspects of their work that are completely out of their control are often under intense stress. They have to be ready for anything at a moment's notice. Airline pilots would be a great example of a job where you have to account for a wide range of variables, such as weather, unrelieved passengers, airplane maintenance issues, fluctuating schedules, and the safety of everyone aboard, the health of everyone on board. Just to name a few. I worked with a man who had to face all of these things on a given workday and still deal with his own personal emotions and physical health. I am amazed by the resilience of such high-stress workers, and I would like to share the story of William, who will be able to resolve some long-standing personal challenges through this process. William worked as a flight captain for a commercial passenger flight for more than 20 years before I even met him. He really enjoyed this job because he loved the connections between technical things and the human teamwork part of the job. Oh my God, my two least favorite things. He didn't mind the pace and especially enjoyed the phases of high workload when he had first started. But his early years in life were not nearly as enjoyable. During my childhood, he said, I was very lonely and lost. My parents were extreme Christians. So enjoying life was simply not acceptable. I could not listen to non-Christian music. I could not go dancing. I could not play basketball. I could not have a girlfriend. Therefore, when I was growing up, my core belief was, if I'm happy, God is gonna punish me for that. If I was happy, God is gonna punish me. This left me with the feeling of being wrong. William said that he struggled with this, and as an adult, he participated in 300 hours of psychoanalysis to try to overcome this underlying feeling. He became an avid reader of self-help books on love, relationships, depression, and similar topics, but he still suffered apathy and extreme shame, perfectionism, suppressed anger, and separateness. Isn't that funny? You just become like a expert on your condition because your mind just wants to be a expert on it, and that doesn't do anything at all. Finally, things came to a head for him, and like many clients I see, he developed physical symptoms. This is how he described one of his lowest points. Following many years of not enjoying life, I got an extreme illness that I almost died from. When it was combined with separating from my wife, I was left feeling completely hopeless. Once he found the completion process, he remembered being surprised to hear that his thoughts could manifest in his body. He had always thought that it was the other way around. What? But through this process, he discovered the reason for his apathy, self-hatred, and perfectionism. I saw clearly that neither the good nor the bad emotions were allowed in my childhood, he explained. My father was quite often in a rage, so I never wanted to be that way. When I began to allow myself to feel or express my emotions for the first time, it was highly a visceral experience. I would dive deep in feelings and face my childhood wounds. A few times it felt like I was maybe dying. My body would shake. When I would experience triggers, I would go well into that emotion where I discovered that I was unconditionally I would go straight into that emotion where I would discover that I could be unconditionally there for my inner child. He said that what helped him the most was to change the circumstances within that memory so that it finally felt resolved. He admitted that relief wasn't instantaneous, but it didn't actually take that long before he started to feel transformed. This is how he described the process in his own words. Looking at the deep wounds inside of myself did not cause me to feel instantly great. First, it forced me to go completely into the direction of surrendering to what it is, and that was really hard. But every time I did this process, it felt like the anchor was lifting. It slowly started to change my life. Now William says that he finally knows how he wants a relationship to feel. I want it to feel warm and fluffy, and that's what I'm going for. Since committing to this process, I have been getting more honest and real, both with myself and with others, and I've learned that I am where I am, and this comforts me. Throughout his life, William thought that he would have to change himself completely to be worthy and to be loved. But now that he has learned to face his emotions rather than bury them, he knows that it's the other way around. Learning to unconditionally love himself just as he is right now. Right now is the answer. I felt like I have really changed my life from the root. He says, in conclusion, I still have more work to do, as we all do. But my relationships have changed so dramatically. The more that I love myself, the more I can take in that love for others. I finally understand at a soul level that love is not love if it hurts. More and more, I find peace in myself and do not have to search for it throughout the outside world. Welcome to self-love and compassionate understanding. One of the main benefits that William received with it was an increase in his ability to love himself. Feeling a boost in one's level of self-love is a natural result of the completion process because this process allows us to reduce our fear. When we are no longer crippled with fear, it doesn't bother us as much as when other people express negative opinions about us in our daily lives. We don't fear it so deeply, and instead of succumbing to self-doubt and self-loathing in the face of criticism, we begin to see other people's hurtful actions as an indication of the pain and fear within themselves. We also know that we can use their hurtful opinions and actions as an excuse to integrate ourselves further and heal ourselves even more. Another benefit related to this is the gift of compassionate understanding. The more you practice this, the more you will begin to see that all behavior, no matter how malevolent it may seem, meaning evil, it is done in an effort to make someone feel better. Once you embrace this reality, you will find that the behavior of the people around you will start to make a whole lot more sense. This means that every single act in existence, whether it involves wanting to kiss someone or kill someone, is committed for one reason, and one reason only: to feel better. So in fact, there is no such thing as being hostile, evil, or malevolent in this universe. All things ultimately boil down to wanting to feel better and thinking that a particular action will make us feel better. This allows you to more fully understand that during your childhood, you formed an unconscious definition of love by watching and interacting with your primary caregivers. Yikes, right? As an adult, you will live your life according to this definition, regardless of how healthy or unhealthy that unconscious definition of love is. So if you were shamed as a child, you associate love with the feeling of being shamed. Thus, you will seek out partners and friends who will shame you because subconsciously you think that's what love is. You assume that love hurts, but the good news is that this process sheds light and truth on that reality and situation. The process reveals that we have come to this life with a particular trigger, and it helps us identify to work through our emotional and mental wounds, because those wounds are all that prevent us from becoming the embodiment of unconditional love. That's why when we do this process, we begin to uncover this pattern within ourselves and develop the ability to see it in others. This process forces us to be unconditionally loving to ourselves, and as a result, we develop the capacity to become unconditionally loving towards others. This produces an incredible ripple effect that radiates far outside of our own circle of influence. I don't think you understand what that means. Here's how it works. The completion process not only creates peace and compassion within our own minds and hearts, but it also creates peace and compassionate love on an interpersonal, worldwide level. Whatever we do in ourselves affects the collective. When we integrate, we cause integration within the collective. When we become unconditionally loving, we cause the collective to become unconditionally loving. When we find peace, we cause peace in the collective. Thank you. In this way, the completion process affects anything it comes in contact with. By starting to use it, we set in motion the benevolent shock wave that will forever change the course of our lives as well as the course of the world. When parenting brings up your own issues, as much as we would like to leave the world a better place, for most of us, we are consumed with just balancing our own inner and outer realities on any given day. For example of this, you might relate to Misty's story. I remember when I first met her, she was a stay-at-home mom of 3. She was struggling to figure out how to be a mother because no one had prepared her for such an incredible personal challenge. She loved her children dearly, but she had no idea how much unresolved stuff that her children were bringing up within her. I enjoyed helping her and watching her confidence as a mother and a woman improve through the work that we did together. When Misty spoke up about her days at home, with all of the new responsibilities, I could relate to it myself, as I had since coached many different clients who had similar issues. Here's how Misty described her reality when we first met. Some days, I find myself becoming so reactive to the littlest things that I spiral into guilt and feel like the worst mom in the world. It becomes obvious to me that if I care for other people every day, I needed my own support. And more specifically, I need some help dealing with my own emotions. After her children would go to bed at night, she loved to read, so she started learning about emotional healing. She said that she found a lot of good techniques, but always had this nagging sense that there was something deeper that she had not gotten to, and she has merely scratched the surface. Then she hits up some news that really resonated with her. She found the completion process. She said it was one of those things that just found its way to her somehow. I attended a seminar about the process thinking that I'd use it just for me, she recalled, but when I started using it, it was absolutely flooring. I had thought that I was a really together person. But once I started doing this process, I realized that I was simply coping with my marriage and my kids by numbing myself. In fact, I had started to cope with all my difficult emotions and thoughts by using a prescription medication drug. It's hard for any parent to admit this, but Misty knew that she could not keep using those coping mechanisms. She went on to say how hard it was to come clean, even to herself. I had never actually faced this trauma in my past. Being the wife of a successful husband and the leader of a women's group in my local church, I had this expectation of being a role model and to set an example within my community. I couldn't just let myself fall apart. But the completion process made me realize how unfulfilled I felt and how insecure I really felt deep down as a wife and a mother. As she gained strength and personal insights, Misty finally faced head-on how much she hated the role that she was playing. One day, she just admitted to herself and her husband that she had enough. I let myself fall apart, and it was ultimately the best thing that ever happened to me and my marriage and my family. Her husband's like, what the fuck? Through the process of facing her inner self, Misty was able to put herself fully back together. She began by modeling her life after her actual desires, rather than trying to be everything for everyone else within her life. She was amazed by the effects that she began to experience not only inside of herself, but inside her home. I started to notice that the emotional health of my children were improving, she explained. They acted out less and got along with each other more, and they seemed healthier. It was obvious that they were mirroring my emotional state, which had greatly improved. Super crazy. So awesome how that happens. When she asked me if she could use the process directly with her own children, I said yes. So she went on to guide her older son through the process. She thought it would be hard to do it with children, but in fact, she found that it was much easier. Her son had no trouble at all accessing his emotions and expressing his true needs. He intuitively knew what to do to resolve his emotional pain. He cried to her about how much pressure he felt to get good grades and how he was so sad when her husband had told him that he was disappointed in him a few months earlier. Oh my God. After the session, Misty said that she noticed that there was a renewed brightness in her son's eyes. The heaviness in him looked like it disappeared overnight. I could see that he felt understood and seen by me, and to my surprise, His food allergies started to go away. Oh. Now we use this process all the time in my house. It has made me a better person, a better mother, a better wife. My family is closer than ever now, and most of all, my kids are happy. Because of this process, my kids will no longer have to drag their emotional baggage with them into their adult lives, and to me, that is priceless. In addition to healing her family, Misty was able to overcome the things that were preventing her from progressing in life. In her case, she was able to stop taking prescription drugs to numb her pain, which was a huge step forward. I see the same thing happen with many clients who are finally able to give up their destructive habits. It happens because once we integrate and become conscious, we have the strength to put an end to these negative behaviors. Things like procrastination, fighting, lying, using drugs, self-sabotaging, withdrawing, and other destructive behaviors, these are all just coping skills or adaptations that we develop as a result of our traumatic experiences. Once we integrate those experiences, we no longer feel like there's any use for these adaptations, so it goes away. Overcoming ritual trauma and incest. Yeah. Anything that causes a person any kind of trauma at any time in their life can get stuck in their body and mind and cause havoc later when a trigger brings up past in some way. This is particularly true with people who have faced ritual abuse in their lives. And I do know this kind of horrific experience firsthand. When I meet people like Angela in the story below, I feel that it is an honor to work with them to help them resolve such deep emotional suffering. I am proud of the work that Angela has done to secure her own healing. Here is how she describes it. My entire life has been a state of empty disassociations. I had no feelings. I was in a permanent state of numbness with only slight variations of discomfort and pain. I tried years of different therapies, and I had to read countless self-help books, but I was in a state of desperation, dying to get past the internal blocks that kept me disconnected from everything in my life, including my children. Angela found that talk therapy and holistic therapy only seemed to get her so far, but these approaches did help her get started, and she was grateful. Those therapies helped her realize that she was suffering from sexual trauma and deep emotional wounds, but it didn't help much to get her beyond the realization of unhealthy patterns. When she tried this process, it was the first type of therapy that got her to feel her own body to the degree that she could actually feel. And the first time she tried it, she started unraveling the trauma that she had locked away through disassociation. She went back into a memory of being 1 year old. Even then, she could see that she was a victim of ritual trauma. It was the most complex and extreme form of abuse that someone could suffer. She said, going through the completion process has blown my reality to pieces, but I would never turn back even if it was an option. I would take all of that earth-shattering emotional pain I am going through as I work through this over the hollow numbness that was my existence before. Anything is better than being a sleepwalker that I once was. Within 4 months, her efforts of healing had taken off. She began doing things that she never thought that she would be capable of doing, such as driving a car by herself. She even overcame her agoraphobia, fear of leaving the house. As soon as she was able to leave on her own, she found that she could think through any process, any stressful situation, instead of just completely avoiding it altogether and relying on other people to take care of her like she had in the past. Angela said that the completion process woke her up to a reality that she did not consciously create, but rather one that she had just drifted into. This had forced me into a position where I had to completely change my life and the relationships I had formed, which had not been easy or without any heartache. I find that I just can't settle for less in my life anymore. The best gift for myself throughout all of this is that I now have the ability to be unconditionally present with myself and with others. Angela still is afraid sometimes that the amount of emotional pain, hopelessness, and despair she experienced might randomly come up again one day. But now she says that she trusts that she has a tool that could guide her through the other side. I now have felt joy, love, and happiness in a way that I never thought was possible for me. Even though that comes with its own set of fears, I can't help but feel eternally grateful for the gifts that I have been given in my life. Working with prison inmates. Another group of people that I sincerely wanted to impact, even from the beginning of my career as a healer, were people in the prison system. This process is a significant breakthrough practice for many inmates because so many of them suffer from trauma, addiction, depression, and chronically low self-esteem. I have long believed that most prisoners within our justice system are incarcerated because of the trauma that they have never been able to resolve from their childhood. This next story is from a man named Michael, who works with inmates. He provided me with such a thoughtful description of the population that I was happy when he agreed that I could share his words here. He has been a volunteer in jails for many years, mostly teaching meditation to the inmates. He finds this to be a very rewarding experience for many reasons. Jail is a sensory-deprived environment that induces self-reflection because there is little distractions. All of the basics of life are taken care of, so inmates have very little to do and virtually no control over their daily routine. Michael says that the research shows that an inmate makes only 20 decisions a day, compared to the 200 decisions that an average person makes. Prison inmates don't have the luxury to do all the things that we take for granted, such as choosing our clothes in the morning, deciding what to eat, when to visit friends and family, or even just going for a walk in the park. Stuck in this kind of limited reality, there is a natural urge for them to learn to be happy, to be independent of their environments. Michael says that this is what meditation offers them, a way to take control of their minds. When he told me that the inmates reported feeling good and were more hopeful after each group meditation he facilitated, he still had a nagging feeling that there could be more. He wanted to act as a sort of anchor to bring them hope and heal them to change their lives and create a better reality for themselves, if he could do that, possibly. That's when he came across the work that I was doing in helping people to heal past traumas. About 2 years ago, he heard about the work, and he resonated with my teachings on shadow work in particular. He heard my explanation about healing an emotional body, which is the key component to the completion process. Michael first practiced the technique to heal some of his own traumas. Then he decided to suggest it to the inmates. For the ones who wanted to participate, he started with his regular Buddhist meditation, and once the participants were brought to a higher state of consciousness, he asked if any of them wanted to volunteer to be guided through this process. Ooh, how fun. It has since become a popular addition to their group sessions. That would be so fun! Since I first introduced the process, there has not been a single session where there aren't at least 2 or 3 inmates who have broken through the deep emotional release. It's astounding to watch these men, these people, who are seen as dangerous and violent, do inner child work and cry like they are small children. A lot of heart connections are created, and I often regret that we are not able to hug each other because it's forbidden to have physical contact with convicts. After such cathartic experiences, I have learned that a number of these men have been able to create new lives for themselves without addiction and crime. Michael believes that this therapy is the light that can transform the most isolated and darkest parts of society. Feelings of childhood innocence return. What? Imagine the freedom that comes with rediscovering your childhood innocence. Once the inmates that Michael worked with got back in touch with their inner child inside them, they gained the positive aspects of childhood, rekindling the important inner relationship. They could then find themselves able to have fun again, gaining the innocence they had then lost touch with. By delving into the subconscious and integrating the pain, we will find what remains is innocence. Innocence is a lightness of being. It is a worry-free state. There is purity to this state because there is nothing obscuring our light. Most people associate innocence with ignorance or being weak. Innocence is neither of these things. When we gain knowledge, we don't have to lose innocence. The only thing that occurs if the knowledge we gain causes us to move into a space of pain or fear. And contrary to popular opinions, there is an immense bravery in innocence. Innocence is a state of openness. It is a fundamentally unafraid state. It is light that is not guarded. It is benevolent and untouchable. We may be able to obscure the light of innocence to a degree where we have no awareness of it, but that light within itself never goes out. The more wisdom you gain, the closer you get to a state of innocence. We could all benefit from regaining our ability to play. Play is defined as an engagement and activity for the purpose of enjoyment and recreation, rather than for a serious or practical purpose. This is where we have to stop and think. In the very definition of the word play, we can find dysfunction in the society that we have co-created. We have all grown up thinking that play is not connected to purpose. We have been led to believe that there was something more important than happiness itself, and we grow up and wonder why we aren't happy, without realizing that one reason is because we don't take the straight path to prioritizing enjoyment. Rather, we spend our lives beating around the bush, hoping that our happiness will come as an end result of other priorities, like keeping a reliable job or reaching goals. By partaking in the completion process, we begin to prioritize enjoyment, and we find that in a state that is less guarded and afraid, we begin to play again. How social workers can employ the completion process. So many different populations can benefit from this process that I feel sometimes that we have only scratched the surface so far. That's why I am thankful for people like Leslie for sharing the process with others through her practice as a licensed clinical social worker. Leslie has found an effective way to incorporate the completion process in her daily practice with clients and agrees that it sets people up for much more than success in their own healing. Most people who come in to see me as a therapist are not used to honoring their negative emotions, she explained. So I spend as much time as needed to help them understand their tendency to avoid feelings and see that avoidance happening in real time. I also interject compassionate responses to their emotions to show them how different it feels to have their emotions validated. Leslie reports that the biggest obstacle to clients fully doing this process is that they have an unconditional fear of their own feelings. She says that her clients have often already spent years mentally working on their life issues, so it's not as easy to get them to accept and understand that there is yet another critical step that they need to make. In her opinion, the two most important aspects of this process are accepting the importance of feeling your emotions and having the willingness to understand the experience of the inner child, even if it seems as it's only a mental construct. Once clients can make the leap of understanding that the inner child exists, she sees a knowing in their physical expression. It's a recognition of themselves, which is like a big relief, as if they are finally saying, "I'm home." She's particularly appreciative of how the details in the first step are designed to create a personalized, safe place through guided meditation. The creation of the safe haven is done so thoroughly that it helps her clients truly create only what their minds knows is satisfying. She believes that the individualized creation gives this process a unique healing foundation. She also says that she likes this process as a linear and limited process with 18 clearly defined steps. These steps give people a safe structure in which they allow the feelings to be in a space that has never been expressed before. Some of my clients dive right into the process and get to feel, possibly for the first time, in all rightness because their primary support or adult self is able to mentally construct unconditional loving kindness and give it to their hurt inner child. Stopping the battle with food and weight. My favorite. I find that following a personal story is also quite captivating because it deals with few common conditions in our world today: obesity, eating disorders, and depression. I have worked with a number of people to help them overcome their weight issues, but the story from Zach Moyer is one that I will never forget. He is a public figure, and his transformative story is well known, so he is happy to have me use his real name. Zach works as a holistic health consultant, writer, food justice advocate, and speaker. When you follow his journey, you'll see that he has come a very long way. He tells his story better than I ever could, so here goes. In 2011, I was obese, self-medicated, depressed, and chronically ill. Due to chronic throat infections and strong psychiatric medications, I was practically bedridden for months because I had given up on my life. Since childhood, I have always struggled with consistent weight gain, and it made me feel completely out of control. When I got older, those same feelings of being out of control manifested in my life externally as binge eating disorders and behaviors. As my health declined and my mental health suffered, one fateful night I contemplated whether or not I should live or die. In the moment, I felt like I did have a choice. I could either take the entire bottle of pills I was prescribed and go to sleep, or I could try to keep going. Thinking of my family and friends and not wanting them to deal with my early departure, I chose to live. Over the years, in an attempt to figure it all out, I sought so many opinions. Each psychiatrist I saw explained to me that I have a chemical imbalance in my brain, and the only solution was to shoot arrows in the dark of the problem in forms of various drugs until one of them one of those various medications that I accept would be the one that I would take for the rest of my entire life. Sounds great. My conversational therapist told me a different approach to seem to have one clear objective: to fix me. My depression was treated as something that I had to fight and resist. My wounded ego told me that my only salvation was to settle down and get myself together. Yet my spirit was relentlessly determined to not settle or accept feeling the way I did as a permanent way to be. Before I knew it, in the cocktail of medications that I was on so strong, I was struggling to wake up in the morning and stay awake during the day. Yet I was still dangerously overweight. I was sick and depressed. Every night, I would make a trip to the grocery store in an attempt to comfort myself. I'd stock up on frozen pizzas, tortilla chips, shredded cheese by the bag, guacamole, and the frozen French fries, to be topped off by 2 liters of diet soda and a pint of ice cream. In a manic episode, I would race home from the store each night to prepare my binge. Binging was perhaps the most pleasurable thing I had ever done in my life. In my little private studio apartment, I could hide from the world with the comforts of my food and escape my life. Responsibly. And rejection. One night, while I was lying in bed binging on ice cream, a beautiful ice cream sandwich, all of a sudden my heart began to palpitate, and I felt the most painful, sharp sensation I had ever experienced within my chest. In total shock and fear, I put my ice cream sandwich down. 2 thoughts crossed my mind in that moment. The first one was, I am literally giving myself a heart attack. If this kills me, I'm going to die alone in my disgusting studio apartment. I will not be found for days, and then when I am, they will discover me in my own filth, surrounded by food. That's a lot more than one thought, or 2 thoughts, but anyway, this is the second thought. Came to me in the form of 2 powerful questions, so there were really like 6 thoughts. Is this healthy behavior? Do healthy people eat like I do? The answer was loud and resounding no. From that moment on, I had a new awareness, and then the missing solution came to me through one of Teal Swan's YouTube videos in her series Ask Teal, when I heard her explain that it is our childhood trauma that roots us in dysfunctional, debilitating pain that we feel in adulthood, which helped me finally realize that nothing is really wrong with me. Instead, a lot of bad things have happened to me. This catapulted my healing journey once I began the process of facing my emotions and feeling. I weaned myself off the year's worth of medications and putting an end to my dangerous food binges. My depressive tendencies vanished, and I was inspired to adopt a more holistic, healthy lifestyle. I even began a productive, healing, and restorative dialogue with my parents about my childhood. In return, I lost 110 pounds. I have cured my hypertension. I have cured my gastric esophageal reflux disease. And I've brought my cholesterol down to normal. I believe that going through the completion process was what ultimately helped me break free from the chains of my medications, my substances, and my addictive binge eating behaviors. I now feel more empathetic and patient with myself in the context of my own weight management. After living and working with this process for myself, I choose to become certified to facilitate this process for others. I enjoy helping people who wish to be better with their weight issues Instead of giving them a diet and exercise plan, I work with them to uncover their triggers and their memories and emotions. Time and time again, I see that this healing works by lifting the anchors that are keeping them stagnant in their dysfunction. We can all learn that it is safe to feel, it's safe to remember, and most importantly, it's safe to be who we truly are. Returning to health and wellness. The story from Zach's life illustrates that physical ailments that we suffer from are caused by our emotional and mental wounds of the past, which can indeed be healed. Even if you have been struggling with a chronic illness or disease for years, it can clear up rather quickly once you start making the choices for yourself that are in alignment with health. Did you hear that? Even if you've been struggling with a chronic meaning you'll always have it and it'll just keep getting worse and worse and worse, as they say. There's no cure to it. It just slowly takes your soul. Even if you haven't been struggling with a chronic illness or disease for years, it can clear up quickly once you start making choices for yourself that are in alignment with health. I've been experiencing this personally in my own life these past couple of weeks through my own perspective and realizing just how true that is. When you are taking care of yourself, your body moves naturally in the direction of healing because it doesn't need to constantly put all of its energy towards what you keep doing to yourself that is making you unhealthy when you're actually, putting stuff in your body that is fuel instead of stuff that your body needs to figure out how to get rid of. It can work on healing other things. It's crazy. Don't be surprised, then, if you find that your diet naturally and effortlessly gravitates towards foods that are actually good for you. You might find that you are effortlessly gravitating to these healthier lifestyles that you didn't even have to struggle to adopt them. Quite likely, you'll also find that you have more energy once you do this process. This happened for Zach, and it can happen for you. The reason is that our fractured childhood selves are like lost streams of energy that are now reintegrated into our body. Our whole consciousness is in fact a huge stream of energy, so the more we integrate our fractured selves, the more energy of consciousness that we have in the now. Zach was also able to reconnect with other people and open up with friends, who later became his roommate. This is because we are fully integrated and developed in the capacity for unconditional focused presence and love. Being around us just feels good, and we begin to influence others to heal just by being near them. Another aspect of this is that we truly become intensely attracted to other people because we represent what their own being is craving to become. Becoming empowered to live a full life. Like Zach and most of my clients, Maggie is also someone who longs to feel some semblance of quote-unquote normal. Life just isn't easy for people like Maggie, who have to work so hard to overcome sexual abuse from their past and somehow put their life back together. In her case, she was confused about what actually happened to her as a child that left her so traumatized years later. She wasn't even completely sure whether her abuse had actually even happened, or maybe she had just made it up. Her story is so much like many other women in this world that I think it's valuable to share what she went through as she found healing and found a way to heal others. The trauma that she was seeking to overcome was a memory of sexual abuse. When she wasn't certain about it, somewhere deep inside she knew that she could not have generated such a specific memory of an actual person in only her imagination. By the time I met her, she had held on to this particular trauma for about 33 years of her life. The memory tormented her because it made her doubt and question her own memories, her psyche, and her past. When the trigger would become activated, I would go into fight or flight mode with whatever people were around me, and no one was exempt, no customer service folks or even police officer or colleagues. As you can well imagine, this led to many situations in my life that were less than ideal. I was unaware of the very real connection between that early trauma and my sometimes crazy responses to situations in my daily life that caused me to feel unsafe. This trauma also caused many problems in my close relationships with my family and friends, and it ended relationships for me many different times. Maggie saw 3 different therapists on and off for more than 13 years. She did not like the way that her therapists seemed to pretend like they were not human beings with authentic feelings. They were so guarded, and they never expressed their emotional reactions to the things that she shared. Maggie said that she hated the way that she could see them mentally trying to figure out the best thing to say rather than just validating what she was feeling. For me personally, the process was everything that traditional counseling never was, and everything I desperately needed. Finally, I was being given the opportunity to create a safe haven in my mind, even before having to discuss my painful emotions. Having Teal's gentle presence guiding me through those feelings was like being flown through the air safely by Superman. It was terrifying because I could fall and die, but also safe and reassuring because I knew she was there. Wow. If you didn't know, I'm your number 1 ninja. Well, thank you for being my number 1 ninja. One moment stands out that Maggie's memory was a time when I suggested that she would walk up to her abuser within the imaginative meditative process. Maggie says that she really helped empower her during this critical part. She says that she appreciated how the entire process moved at her own pace. Maggie said that she felt really raw during this process, but also more validated even before than ever before in her entire life. The first time I went through this process, I felt many things such as scared, sad, embarrassed, shaky, and hopeless. Then these things shifted into feelings of feeling empowered, supported, validated, safe, and calm. Prior to this point, I found it really difficult to genuinely be present with someone else's emotions. I was unable to connect with other people on a deep emotional level. Now I'm much more capable of sitting with any level of deep emotional pain, and I know that this is a direct result of sitting with my own pain. Maggie has since become a completion process certified practitioner and says that she continues to be humbled and amazed at the level of healing that can occur, often in just one session. I have the opportunity and the pleasure of helping a great many of people to integrate their traumas and what happened to them at whatever age that may have been, right from time spent in the room to 8 years old and beyond. I'm surprised at my own capacity to be present with the pain of others, as they share memories of extreme physical or emotional abuse and violence. Integration improves all of your relationships. Relationships naturally become healthier when you begin to heal because you learn how to be loving and interdependent rather than codependent. Before we integrate, we desperately try to get our unconscious needs met, and so we enter into relationships because we're trying to fill the hole left behind by our suppressed self. We are in relationships for reasons other than love, and we don't even realize it. Once we begin to reintegrate ourselves, the holes within ourselves begin to get filled. We start to become whole, and therefore we start to enter relationships through conscious choice instead of our subconscious choices. Another way of saying this is that we form relationships for love instead of meeting our subconscious needs, aka our fears. We also become capable of giving unconditional love. So as a result, conflict leaves the relationship, exits. We become capable of giving and receiving love. And because we have become more conscious of ourselves, we make conscious decisions in our relationships. Our partners stop triggering us as drastically as they once did, and we are less reactive to them. We even begin to use this conflict in our relationship as a healthy excuse to heal together, rather than a reason to blame each other. Imagine that. Can you? The practice of putting yourself back together again. At times, the suffering that we experience here on earth seems quite unbearable. But there is an upside to suffering. The upside of suffering is that it cuts us off from our true selves and from joy to such a degree that we can no longer take it. It brings us at a crossroads where we have nothing more to lose, so we begin to do things drastically different. You can only suffer so much before only thing left to do is to stop running from what is scaring you, no matter what the cost. By deciding this, you set yourself free. You realize that the only answer is to turn around and walk towards your aversions instead. You learn the art of allowing. Instead of feeling better, your aim is to get better at feeling. As a result, you become intensely present. The unconscious within you becomes conscious. Craving becomes pure desire. The shadow within you is no longer separated from the light of your own consciousness. You begin to integrate, and as a result, you start to experience yourself as whole. This is when you catch a glimpse of peace for the very first time. From this day on, you will see each moment of your life as a new beginning. Each moment is an opportunity to begin anew, and so each day you will seize that opportunity. With clear eyes, you will see that life is not the past, and life is not the future. Life is now. And you are culminating that now. And all that will be manifested is in the now. The objective of reality, of eternalness, which exists far beyond the confines of subjective truth and time, contains a glimpse of this. Because time does not exist, it is your choice what you become in each moment. You cannot become more or less of what you already and always are. The common thread that weaves its way through all the varied experiences that people have with this process is a feeling of being put back together or becoming whole. But the truth is, you were never broken. You were never less than complete. Inevitably, when you strive to become complete, by committing to the process of putting yourself back together again, you will one day arrive at the realization that you were, are, and will always be whole, complete, exactly as you are, in your perfect state of continued evolution. Okay, so there is a little tiny bit left. I'm just going to read it because it's just a little bit afterwards, and then we are done with this book, you guys. So let's relish in these last words. there is a inextricable link between suffering and transformation. So, I am thankful for all the ways that I have suffered in my life. Some days I consider them to be a curse, but other days I see them in a completely different light. My suffering catapulted me, as pain so often does, into a space where I have to ask the bigger questions in life. I had to become aware to survive it all. I was blown open to forgiveness. Suffering gifted me with an entirely new perspective. This process, which has ultimately put me back together, and which is now helping to put so many other people back together, would not have been possible without my pain. So I honor my suffering as my single greatest teacher in this life. Though it has been an acutely painful apprenticeship, it is one that I don't regret. When we look at something across the world, that causes suffering, or when we look at something in someone else's life that causes them to suffer, we feel powerless. If we are empathetic, we want desperately to do something to improve the situation. We don't know how. This is even truer when the suffering is caused by a large conflict, such as a war. We get to a point where we feel utterly powerless to all the suffering in the world. What are we going to do? Are we going to get on a plane, fly to the country where the war is taking place, get off the plane, walk into one of these killing zones, and try to talk terrorists or soldiers into stopping the bloodshed? Some of us might be inspired to do that, but for most of us, we know the answer to that question is no. As a result, we feel paralyzed to improve anything. We begin to feel as if the world has forsaken us. The most crucial thing for us to understand is that we will never feel good about the world we live in, or about ourselves, until we stop addressing suffering in terms of specific, isolated incidents. We will only reduce suffering if we treat suffering on this planet as a whole. We can only make an impact on suffering if we feel empowered instead of powerless. We can only make an impact if we believe that we can make an impact. If you want to believe you can make an impact, and what's more, if you want to start actually making an impact, look at suffering as a whole instead of in parts. Instead of focusing on one war that you feel like you can't do anything about, instead of focusing on isolated incidents that cause suffering, focuses on the suffering in and of itself, or at least on collective human suffering. Look at the big picture, which I believe is something we can have a direct, tangible impact on. It is my belief that we need to take a vow to reduce collective suffering by adding a collective well-being every day in ways that we can. There is an enormous difference between focusing on and resisting the problem and focusing on and going in the direction of a solution. You will know you are focusing on the solution when you feel emotional empowerment. When we look at suffering as a whole, we soon realize that our suffering is a part of the collective suffering. It is then becoming a part of the most important thing for us to do is reduce suffering in the world to reduce our own suffering as individuals. I hope the completion process will help you do just that. We are linked to one another in a beautiful, invisible web that makes up all of life. Because of this, it can be said that the single most important thing that you will ever do for the world, as far as suffering goes, is do whatever it takes to reduce your own suffering and enable yourself to feel joy. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking this step for yourself, and, therefore, taking this step for us all. Ah. that's the completion process, my friends. Thank you. We did it. This was our first book that we went through together. How beautiful. This is such a happy milestone for me. Thank you for being here with me during this vulnerable moment in my life. You're amazing. Now we need to read a new book. Thank you. I would love to hear your thoughts if you happened to get to the end of this, whether it be on Twitch or on YouTube, and you read the whole thing all the way through, listened to it all the way. I'd love to hear what you thought about it. What was your favorite part? Have you done the process yourself? What was the experience like? I'd love to hear your input on it. Yeah. Cool. Thank you guys. Love you. I'm super tired now. That book got me so ready for just some tea. Sounds really good actually right now. And some sleep. So I'm gonna get myself ready for some tea and some sleep. But I'll see you later. Tomorrow morning actually, to do some meditation. And it's gonna be a very special one. It's gonna be actually a meditation that Teal Swan has taught me herself, and it is a self-love meditation. So I hope to see you 7 a.m. Arizona time tomorrow morning. Hope to see you there. Thank you. Love you. Goodbye. I'll see you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.